What happens when an arrogant empire pokes a sleeping giant? They expected an easy victory. They anticipated a swift human surrender. Instead, they triggered a retaliation so absolute it erased their homeworld from the cosmos in mere minutes. This is the day humanity rewrote the rules of interstellar war. Deep space was rarely eventful, and for the crew of Outpost Kepler-8, that was precisely the point. Positioned on the ragged edge of the Orion Spur, the station was a glorified listening post, built into the hollowed-out husk of an iron-rich asteroid. It was a joint venture between the United Nations Space Command and several megacorporations. The sensor arrays were cutting-edge Lockheed Martin deep space telemetry units, while the life support systems bore the unmistakable ruggedized stamp of Boeing's orbital division. Commander Augustus Wallace stared at the central hollow table, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee that tasted vaguely of burnt copper. He was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with years of dealing with the bureaucratic nightmare of managing a frontier station. His command consisted of barely 200 souls, mostly engineers, astrophysicists, and a token security detail, equipped with outdated General Dynamics defense platforms. Across the command deck, Chief Engineer Rachel Higgins was swearing softly under her breath. She was waist-deep in the primary console's maintenance hatch, trying to bypass a faulty relay in the quantum communication suite. If Raytheon is going to charge the government 6 billion credits for a faster-than-light router, the least they could do is ensure the cooling fans don't snap off every 3 months. Rachel grumbled, emerging from the deck, plating with a smudge of grease across her forehead. Augustus chuckled, setting his mug down. "Write it up in the quarterly report, Rachel. I'm sure the defense contractors in Washington will send you a personalized apology." "I don't want an apology, Augustus. I want a wrench that doesn't bend in zero gravity." Before Augustus could reply, the Lockheed Martin sensor array screamed. It wasn't a standard proximity alert. It was the harsh, atonal blare of the Class 1 intrusion alarm, a sound neither of them had heard outside of a simulation. The holotable violently refreshed, shifting from the calm blue of empty space to a chaotic sea of crimson warning runes. "Report," Augustus barked the relaxed frontier commander, vanishing in an instant, replaced by a hardened military veteran. Spatial distortions detected just outside the asteroid's magnetic shadow. Rachel said, her fingers flying over the console. "Massive energy spikes, tachyonic particle floods. Someone is punching a hole right through subspace." "Pirates?" Augustus asked, though he already knew the answer. Pirates didn't use subspace folding technology. "No," Rachel breathed, her eyes widening as the tactical feed rendered the incoming contacts. "Commander, it's the Ascendancy." The Orion Ascendancy was a sprawling expansionist alien empire that had spent the last 2 decades testing humanity's borders. They were a fiercely proud militaristic species that viewed humanity as a soft, fractured alliance of merchants and bureaucrats. Until now, their aggressions had been limited to proxy wars and border skirmishes. As the subspace rift stabilized, 90 massive warships spilled out into normal space. They were jagged, menacing constructs of dark alloy, heavily armed, and radiating immense thermal energy. 90 capital ships, Augustus whispered, feeling a heavy knot form in his stomach. Against a listening post. "They aren't here to capture the station, Rachel." "Incoming transmission," Rachel asked, already routing power to the deflector shields. "None. They aren't even demanding a surrender." The Ascendancy fleet moved with predatory grace. They didn't bother with fighters or boarding craft. The lead dreadnoughts simply aligned their primary accelerator cannons with Kepler-8. "Shields are up, but the General Dynamics grid is only rated for micrometeorites and stray pirate fire." Rachel reported, her voice trembling slightly, but remaining professional. It won't hold against a concentrated orbital bombardment. It doesn't have to, Augustus said, his voice eerily calm. He stepped up to the primary command console and unlocked a heavy physical panel covered in warning tape. Rachel, I need you to completely bypass the thermal regulators on the Boeing comms array. I need a continuous, uninterruptible handshake with Earth Space Command. Augustus, if I bypass the regulators, the array will melt itself into slag in less than 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes, Augustus replied, meeting her gaze. Initiate the Shiva protocol. Rachel froze. Every high-ranking officer and chief engineer on a frontier outpost knew about the Shiva protocol, but it was considered a ghost story, a myth whispered among cadets. It was the ultimate dead hand switch. Doing it now, she said, swallowing hard. She jammed her access key into the terminal. Outside, the void erupted into violence. The Ascendancy dreadnoughts fired. Dozens of hypervelocity plasma bolts slammed into Kepler-8's kinetic shields. The entire asteroid shuddered violently. Overhead lights shattered raining sparks down onto the command deck. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as power surges overwhelmed the aging infrastructure. "Shields at 40%, Rachel yelled over the din of screaming alarms and groaning metal. "Hull breaches in sectors 4, 7, and 9. Life support is failing." "Hold the connection," Augustus ordered, gripping the railing to stay on his feet. He watched the tactical display as the alien ships maneuvered closer arrogantly, closing the distance to ensure total annihilation. "Let them get a little closer. Let them saturate our sensors." The Ascendancy commander, a warlord seeking glory back on their home planet of Sirius Prime, wanted a spectacle. They wanted to broadcast the destruction of a human outpost to prove that Earth was weak. They wanted to show the galaxy that humanity's defensive lines were paper-thin. What they didn't realize was that Kepler-8's sensor array wasn't just recording the attack. It was actively mapping the unique subspace telemetry of the alien star drives. It was locking onto the encrypted command signals, bouncing back and forth between the dreadnoughts and their homeworld. "Shields are gone," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a whisper as the primary display flashed red. "The next volley will crack the asteroid." Augustus walked over to her station and placed a firm, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Is the data packet away?" "Yes," Rachel said, looking up at him. "Telemetry FTL signatures and the direct subspace routing coordinates to their capital world. It's locked into the data stream. Earth has it all." "You did good, Rachel. You did incredibly well." Outside the viewport, the alien dreadnoughts charged their main batteries for the final killing blow. The light of the plasma accumulators cast a harsh, blinding glare across the shattered command deck. The Ascendancy thought they had won a great victory. They believed they had drawn first blood in a war that would end with human subjugation. "Message sent," Augustus whispered, as the sky outside turned a brilliant terminal white. Kepler-8 detonated, fracturing into 1 billion pieces of irradiated dust. The Ascendancy fleet lingered for a few moments, recording the debris field, before smoothly turning back toward their subspace rift, leaving the ruins of the human outpost drifting in the cold void. Halfway across the galaxy, deeply buried within the Cheyenne Mountain complex in Colorado, the secure servers of Earth Space Command received the final transmission from Outpost Kepler-8. Dr. Stuart Fisher, director of the Advanced Weapons Division, was abruptly pulled from a high-level budgetary meeting by a frantic aide. Stuart was a brilliant, pragmatic man who had spent his entire career in the shadow of the military-industrial complex. He had helped design the targeting algorithms used by SpaceX's orbital defense tethers, and he understood the brutal calculus of interstellar survival better than anyone alive. When Stuart stepped into the primary situation room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The massive central screens were displaying the raw telemetry data sent by Rachel Higgins. "Talk to me," Stewart said, adjusting his glasses as he approached the command table. "Outpost Kepler 8 is gone. Doctor," a young operations lieutenant said, his face pale. The Orion Ascendancy dropped 90 capital ships on them. No demands, no warning, complete annihilation. Commander Wallace and his crew were lost. A heavy silence fell over the room. Politicians and generals exchanged horrified looks. The Ascendancy had finally crossed the line. This wasn't a skirmish. This was an unprovoked act of total war. "Did Wallace activate the Shiva protocol?" Stewart asked, his voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "Yes, sir," the lieutenant confirmed. "We received the complete data burst. We have the exact subspace routing coordinates for the Ascendancy fleet. Furthermore, because their commander was broadcasting the attack live back to their homeworld, we have a perfectly stable two-way hyper-tunnel coordinate lock on Sirius Prime." Stewart looked at the screen. The Ascendancy thought humanity fought like they did with fleets, slow supply lines, and grand, honorable battles of attrition. They viewed war as a series of glorious conquests. Humanity, however, had learned the hard lessons of total war centuries ago. They didn't want glory. They didn't want honorable combat. They wanted survival. And years ago, the highest echelons of the Earth government had made a terrifying decision. If an alien power ever committed an act of unprovoked extermination against a human colony, there would be no proportional response. There would only be the Oppenheimer Directive. "Patch me through to the President and the Joint Chiefs," Stewart ordered. "Prepare the Archangel Array." Within minutes, the holographic avatars of Earth's most powerful leaders materialized in the room. There was no debate. There were no long-winded speeches about diplomacy or proportional response. The footage of Kepler 8's destruction played on a loop. The Ascendancy had made their intentions clear. "Director Fisher," the President said, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "Is the array operational?" "Yes, Mr. President," Stewart replied. "Thanks to Commander Wallace's final telemetry burst, we have an exact spatial lock on Sirius Prime. We bypass their frontier defenses. We bypass their fleets. We have a direct line to their center of mass. Execute the directive, Stewart. God forgive us." The transmission cut out. Stewart turned to his terminal. The room was dead silent. Spooling up the Archangel Array, Stewart announced, his fingers typing in the authorization codes. The Archangel Array was not a fleet of ships. It was humanity's darkest secret, a mega-structure hidden in the asteroid belt, built by a shadow coalition of Lockheed Boeing and private orbital foundries. It was in essence a hypervelocity mass driver, the size of a small moon, coupled with an experimental, localized space-folding engine. Humanity hadn't figured out how to send living beings through a folded space wormhole safely. The gravitational shear would tear organic matter apart, but sending a solid slug of compressed iron and tungsten weighing roughly 50 million tons, that was perfectly viable. Target locked, Sirius Prime, core trajectory calculated. The AI system chimed its voice, devoid of emotion. On Sirius Prime, the Ascendancy was celebrating. Trillions of citizens watched the holographic broadcasts of the mighty fleet obliterating the human outpost. Their supreme warlord gave a booming speech from the grand balcony of the Capitol spire, declaring the beginning of a new era of expansion. They mocked the fragile human structures. They laughed at the lack of a human counterattack. They believed they were gods among the stars. Fold drive charged. The young lieutenant in Cheyenne Mountain reported, his hands shaking over the console. "Fire," Stewart said softly. In the Sol system, the Archangel Array thrummed with the energy of a captured star. A localized wormhole, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, ripped open directly in front of the massive barrel. The 50-million-ton kinetic kill vehicle was accelerated, to 99% the speed of light. It entered the fold. There was no travel time. There was no warning radar. 1 second, the sky over Sirius Prime was a brilliant, celebratory purple filled with the triumphant banners of an aggressive empire. The next second, the sky vanished. A near light-speed impact of that mass doesn't create an explosion. It creates a cataclysm that breaks the fundamental laws of planetary physics. The projectile struck the northern hemisphere of Sirius Prime and instantly punched through the crust, obliterating the mantle and striking the planetary core in less than a fraction of a heartbeat. The kinetic energy transferred into the planet was unimaginable. The crust shattered like a dropped porcelain vase. Oceans instantly boiled into superheated plasma. The atmosphere ignited a shockwave of absolute destruction, traveling around the globe faster than the speed of sound, erasing cities' mountains, and the celebrating billions before their nervous systems could even register the flash of light. In 3 minutes, Sirius Prime was no longer a planet. It was a rapidly expanding cloud of molten rock and superheated gas, the heart of the Orion Ascendancy, a civilization that had stood for thousands of years, was simply gone. Back in Cheyenne Mountain, the telemetry screens went black as the subspace connection to Sirius Prime severed. Stewart took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The room was suffocatingly quiet. They had won, but there was no cheering. Just the cold, hard realization of what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to the brink. "Log it," Stewart finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Ascendancy Homeworld is neutralized. Begin broadcasting the footage to every known alien empire in the sector." He looked at the empty black screen where the alien planet used to be. "Let them know," Stewart added, "that humanity doesn't play games." Silence reigned in the subterranean bunkers of Cheyenne Mountain, thick and suffocating. Director Stuart Fisher stared at the blank telemetry monitors, the absence of data speaking louder than any klaxon. Sirius Prime was gone. Billions of lives, centuries of history, an entire civilization's heart erased in the time it takes to draw a breath. "Broadcast is away, Director," the communications lieutenant David Miller said quietly. His hands were still trembling over the console. "We're flooding every known hyperspace frequency with the raw footage of the strike. Every alien empire in the Orion Spur is receiving it right now." Stewart nodded slowly. He felt no triumph, only a hollow metallic dread settling in his stomach. The Oppenheimer directive had been executed perfectly. The deterrence theorists in Washington had always argued that absolute, overwhelming retaliation would guarantee human safety. They believed that seeing a homeworld reduced to an expanding nebula of superheated ash would instantly pacify any surviving enemy forces. They were profoundly, fatally wrong. Karma Stewart would soon realize was not merely a spiritual concept whispered by philosophers. In the cold, unforgiving vacuum of astrophysics, karma was simply Newton's third law scaled up to a galactic level. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. A high-pitched chime cut through the stillness of the command center. It wasn't the standard military early warning system. It was the proprietary alert tone of the Lattice OS, the autonomous defense network originally pioneered decades ago by defense contractor Palmer Luckey and heavily integrated into Earth's orbital infrastructure by Anduril Industries. The system was designed to bypass human latency, using decentralized AI to track threats that conventional radar could not comprehend. "Director Fisher," David called out, his voice cracking, "the Lattice network is flagging a massive anomaly at the Kepler-8 coordinates." Stewart quickly crossed the room, leaning over the holographic tactical display. "Show me. Did the Ascendancy fleet scatter?" "No, sir," David replied, rapidly keying in decryption sequences. The hologram shimmered, rendering the 90 Ascendancy dreadnoughts that had just obliterated Commander Augustus Wallace and Chief Engineer Rachel Higgins. They aren't retreating, they are reformatting their combat formations. And Director, there is a massive energy buildup in the exact location where the Archangel array fired. Stewart felt the blood drain from his face. The subspace tunnel. When the 50-million-ton kinetic slug shattered Sirius Prime, the planet didn't just explode. It underwent a rapid, localized hypercollapse. The kinetic energy had to go somewhere. Because the wormhole generated by the Archangel array was still decaying, it acted like an open valve in a pressure cooker. "Radiation backdraft," Stewart whispered in horror. "The planetary destruction is funneling exotic particles back through our firing trajectory." "Warning," the automated Anduril AI chimed overhead. Class 5 exotic radiation surge detected in Sector Sol. Impending grid failure. A blinding flash of ethereal blue light erupted across the primary view screens as the backdraft hit the Sol system. The exotic radiation wave bypassed physical armor, directly washing over Earth's orbital defense grids. In an instant, the multi-billion-dollar Lockheed and Boeing defense platforms went dark. The SpaceX communication tethers burned out, their delicate quantum relays fused into useless slag. The karma of using a reality-breaking weapon was immediate. The backdraft had completely blinded Earth. "We just lost orbital telemetry," a general shouted from the back of the room. "The Archangel array is offline. Power couplings are entirely melted. We have no primary shields, no FTL sensors. Get those systems back online," Stewart ordered, his voice echoing over the rising panic. "Reboot the lattice network on isolated analog servers if you have to." Sir David interrupted, his eyes fixed on a secondary hardened deep space tracking monitor that had survived the EMP wave. The Ascendancy fleet at Kepler 8, they just initiated a mass subspace jump. Stewart leaned over the console. The horrifying truth of human psychology versus alien desperation clicked into place. Humanity assumed the destruction of Sirius Prime would break the enemy's spirit. But humanity had fundamentally miscalculated the nature of a warrior culture that suddenly had nothing left to lose. By erasing their homeworld, Earth had not secured a surrender. They had severed the Ascendancy fleet's only tether to restraint. The 90 dreadnoughts no longer had a government to answer to. They no longer had families to return to. They no longer cared about surviving the war. Humanity had accidentally forged the most dangerous force in the universe, a ghost fleet driven by absolute suicidal vengeance. Where are they jumping to? The President's holographic avatar demanded, flickering wildly as the radiation interference messed with the signal. "They tracked the backdraft, Mr. President," Stewart said, his voice grim. "They followed the tunnel's collapse right back to the source. They are heading straight for Earth. How long do we have, without the Archangel array and with our primary defense grids fried by our own weapon?" Stewart paused, calculating the grim math in his head. 30 minutes. They will be in Earth orbit in 30 minutes. The room descended into chaos. The architects of total war were suddenly faced with the terrifying consequence of their own absolute victory. The great human empire, having just flexed its ultimate power, was now sitting utterly defenseless in the dark. General Bradley or Stewart said, turning to the Supreme Commander of Earth's conventional forces, "Can the Anduril autonomous drone swarms hold off 90 Ascendancy dreadnoughts?" General Thomas Bradley, a scarred veteran of the early Mars uprisings, shook his head slowly. "Those drones are designed for interception and harassment, Stewart. They aren't meant to stop capital ships hell-bent on ramming the planet. If those dreadnoughts decide to initiate a kinetic bombardment or worse, crash their own reactor cores into our atmosphere, there isn't a damn thing our conventional fleets can do to stop all of them." "Then we have to think outside conventional parameters," Stewart stated, his mind racing. We built the Archangel array in the asteroid belt for a reason. It has a localized space-folding engine. An engine that is currently dead overloaded by the radiation backdraft, Bradley pointed out. The targeting and firing mechanisms are dead, Stewart corrected, pulling up the schematics of the massive megastructure. But the fold core itself is essentially a contained singularity. If we can manually disable the containment field, just as the Ascendancy fleet drops out of hyperspace. David stared at the screen, doing the math. Director, if you breach the fold core's containment, it won't just destroy the dreadnoughts. It will create a localized gravity collapse. It will shatter the entire asteroid belt. The resulting debris wave will strip Earth of every satellite space station and orbital shipyard we possess. We'll be trapped on the surface for a century. It's either that, Stewart said coldly, or we let 90 grieving, suicidal warships turn Earth into a mirror image of Sirius Prime. Alarms shattered the tranquility of the Sol system. High above Earth's atmosphere, the fabric of space tore open like cheap fabric. The Ascendancy Ghost Fleet had arrived. They did not emerge in standard tactical formations. There was no vanguard, no flanking maneuvers. The 90 dreadnoughts spilled out of subspace in a brutal, disorganized swarm, their hulls radiating intense heat, their weapon batteries already firing blindly into the void. General Thomas Bradley stood beside Stewart in the command center, coordinating the desperate defense. Launch the lattice swarms, all of them. Expend every piece of ordnance we have. Millions of autonomous Anduril defense drones deployed from hidden lunar silos and orbital hangars. They swarmed like angry hornets, calculating intercept vectors at the speed of light. They slammed into the lead Ascendancy dreadnoughts, detonating their antimatter warheads in brilliant flashes of white light. 3 of the massive alien ships staggered their kinetic shields, buckling under the sheer volume of the swarm attack. But the Ascendancy ships didn't care. They didn't divert power to repair their shields. They didn't attempt to evade. They're ignoring the drones, David reported, his voice tight with panic. Director, they are locking their primary accelerator cannons on Earth's major population centers. London, New York, Tokyo, Geneva. They are going to glass the surface. Time to intercept, Stewart asked, sweat beading on his forehead, as he accessed the master override controls for the Archangel array. They fire in 2 minutes. I need access to the array's core. Stewart yelled, his fingers flying across the terminal. The remote links are dead from the radiation wave. Is anyone still alive on the array? The Archangel array was heavily automated, but it maintained a skeleton crew of engineers for maintenance. The communications channel crackled with horrific static. This is Engineering Station Alpha. A weak, bloodied voice coughed over the comms. Director Fisher, is that you? Who is this? Chief Technician Gregory Vance. The voice cut out, replaced by static. Stewart swore under his breath. The radiation must have cooked half the crew alive. Listen to me. I need someone to manually disengage the primary magnetic containment field on the fold core. Do you understand? You have to pull the physical control rods. A long, agonizing pause filled the channel. Director. A new voice came through. It was deeper, calmer. This is Senior Engineer Robert Miller. We know what's happening outside. We see the fleet. Robert, Stewart said, his voice dropping to an urgent plea. If you pull those rods, the core will collapse. It will create a gravity well that will suck the Ascendancy fleet into a micro-singularity. But it will also destroy the array and everything around it. We're already dead, Director, Robert replied, his voice eerily peaceful. The radiation shielding failed 10 minutes ago. We're just waiting for the end. Tell my family. Tell them I did my job. I will, Stewart promised, his throat tight. Do it, Robert. Pull the rods. In space, the Ascendancy dreadnoughts reached their optimal firing positions. The massive plasma accumulators on their bows glowed with blinding intensity. Down on Earth, warning sirens wailed in every city. Billions of people looked up at the sky waiting for the end of the world. It was a terrifying, poetic mirror of what had happened to Sirius Prime just an hour earlier. The karmic wheel had completed its violent rotation. Deep within the superstructure of the Archangel array, senior engineer Robert Miller gripped the heavy tungsten control rods of the containment field. With a final agonizing heave, he ripped them from their housings. The megastructure groaned as the laws of physics unraveled inside its core. Without the magnetic containment, the captured singularity violently expanded. To the Ascendancy fleet, it must have looked like a new sun igniting in the middle of the asteroid belt. The singularity tore open space-time, generating an unfathomable gravitational pull. The 90 dreadnoughts, caught entirely off guard, were violently yanked backward. "Firing sequence interrupted," David shouted in Cheyenne Mountain. "The alien ships are being pulled out of orbit." The visual feed from the surviving lunar observatories captured the apocalyptic majesty of the event. The Ascendancy warships desperately fired their main thrusters, trying to escape the pull, but it was useless. One by one, the massive dreadnoughts were dragged into the crushing embrace of the collapsing array. The metal of their hulls stretched and spaghettified before detonating into silent, brilliant flashes of light as they crossed the event horizon. Within 30 seconds, the entire Ghost Fleet was consumed, and then the singularity collapsed in on itself, resulting in a devastating shockwave. The explosion completely shattered the asteroid belt. Billions of tons of rock ice and metal were sent hurtling outward in a massive kinetic wave. "Fleet destroyed," David whispered. "But the debris wave—" "It's hitting the orbital infrastructure," General Bradley said, grimly, watching the tactical map turn red. The shockwave slammed into Earth's orbit. Every surviving defense platform, every weather satellite, every commercial space station, and every deep space communications relay was pulverized by the expanding cloud of hypervelocity shrapnel. The sky above Earth turned into a chaotic, swirling storm of debris. Humanity had survived, but the cost was absolute. Stuart slumped back into his chair, the adrenaline finally leaving his system. The monitors in the command center flickered, rendering the terrifying new reality. Earth was safe from the Ascendancy, but it was now completely isolated. The debris field, a catastrophic realization of the Kessler syndrome, formed an impenetrable iron ring around the planet. Any ship attempting to leave the atmosphere would be shredded instantly. Humanity was grounded. The room was silent, save for the hum of the analog servers. They had won the war in a single afternoon. They had proven humanity's terrifying supremacy. But as Stuart looked at the chaotic static of the ruined orbital grid, he realized the ultimate truth of their victory. They had used a weapon of absolute annihilation, and in return, the universe had placed them in a cage of their own making. The iron ring surrounding Earth was a monument to their arrogance, a permanent reminder that in the cold, dark forest of the galaxy, there are no clean victories. When you dare to erase your enemies entirely, the shockwave will inevitably reach your own shores. Karma had collected its debt. Humanity would live, but they would look up at a sky permanently scarred by their own ruthless power, trapped on their homeworld, forced to reflect on the monsters they had to become to survive. If you are captivated by this incredible tale of interstellar war, human resilience, and the devastating consequences of absolute power, make sure to smash that like button. Your support helps us bring more thrilling sci-fi sagas and HFY stories to life. Don't forget to share this epic journey with your fellow sci-fi enthusiasts and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on our latest universe-expanding narratives. Join our community today.